good morning. Today is the 11th day of the month of Iyar. It's also the 11th day of the month of May, and we are about to start a brand new book. The book is called The Four Worlds. This book, as opposed to the other books that we have studied before, is not a discourse. It's not a presentation of an essay that was conveyed, that was taught by one of the Chabad Rebbes. Rather, this is a letter that was written to a man who asked the question, and he says, I'm just confused about the four worlds. Why would he be confused about the four worlds? Well, as I was telling Fred before, it's hard enough to keep up with our own world. When we have to deal with other worlds, what are they? Who said they were four? Where is this coming from? And what does this mean? But before we get started with the actual text over here, I wanted to talk a little bit about the author of this letter. The author of this letter is a man by the name of Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. That's my name. This is my namesake. He was the sixth Rebbe in the line of seven Rebbes of Chabad. The seventh Rebbe, of course, is our Rebbe, this Rebbe, today's Rebbe, or the one that we follow. The previous one, he is considered the previous Rebbe. I'll continue to call him the previous Rebbe.
Schneerson's the previous one?
They're all Schneersons. From three to seven, they were all Schneersons. Schneer Zalman was the name of the first Rebbe of Chabad. Schneer Zalman. And we have a son called Zalman. That's the same name. His name is Schneer Zalman. Here he is.
That's your son's name.
That's my son's name. His name is Schneer Zalman. The second Rebbe, who was the son of the Schneer Zalman, he named himself Schneori. Because in those days, the Rebbe himself, the first Rebbe, Schneer's name was Baruchovich, because his father's name was Baruch. And that's how surnames worked, at least around there, or that time, they named themselves after their fathers. So I would be Shmuelevich, because my father's name is Shmuel, and so on. So this is how the names worked. So the first Rebbe's name was Baruchovich. The second Rebbe, who was the son of Schneer, called himself Schneuri. The third Rebbe, his mother died when he was before 3 years old, and so his grandfather ended up bringing him up. His grandfather, Schneer Zalman, the same Rebbe that brought his predecessor. He married his first cousin, who was the daughter of the Schneuri, and had a bunch of kids. And his youngest became the fourth Rebbe. He became the third Rebbe, a son-in-law of the second Rebbe, a grandson of the first Rebbe. And he called himself Schneer's son, the son of Schneer, just to differ between his father-in-law, who was Schneuri. So he called himself Schneer's son. Okay? Now, his son became the fourth Rebbe, and the fourth Rebbe's son became the fifth Rebbe, and the fifth Rebbe's son became the sixth Rebbe. The sixth Rebbe only had daughters. The second daughter, the middle daughter, whose name was Chaya Mushka, married a fourth or fifth cousin, who was a direct descendant of the son of the third Rebbe, of the first son of the third Rebbe.
We're all related.
Right. The third Rebbe had 7 sons. The youngest became the Rebbe in Lubavitch. The oldest did not become a Rebbe, and he had a son whose name was Baruch Schneer, and he had a son whose name was Levi Yitzchak, who had a son called Schneer, who had another son called Levi Yitzchak, and then came the Rebbe. And the Rebbe, therefore, is a direct descendant of the third Rebbe, but not through Rebbe lineage. Married the daughter of the sixth Rebbe, and as a son-in-law, and the previous Rebbe had no sons, he became the seventh Rebbe. Okay? So that's the lineage over here. That's how it works. Now, the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, was born in the town of Lubavitch in the year 1880, in the summer of 1880. And he was an only child. There was no other daughters either. It was just him. His father was a very, very important and massive, giant figure. First of all, what he did to Chabad, Hasidism, basically his discourses are the most esoteric, the most, if you want to get to the top, those are the ones that you study. The fifth Rebbe of Chabad, Rabbi Shalom Ber, our oldest son's name Shalom Ber, it's his name. He was in Lubavitch. He was the son of the fourth Rebbe, who was the son of the third Rebbe. So he went and put together. His discourse. We'll do one or two of his discourses sooner or later. Probably the next one in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. He takes you to. What he does is he really smoothens out. He gets down to the nitty gritty. He gets into the details and he explains everything. Oh, it's amazing, but it takes a lot of thought and focus. He also set up the system of yeshivas in Chabad, which are the only yeshivas in the world that systematically, in other words, in all the world of all the yeshivas around the entire world, that systematically study Hasidic philosophy with kids, with children over the age of bar mitzvah, the teenagers. I started studying when I was 12 already. And by the time you're 15 or 16, you're dealing with the fifth Rebbe stuff, the easier stuff, the more introductory stuff. So he started that yeshiva system that continues to this day. All Chabad go through that system where you study for 3 hours Hasidic philosophy, and you study for about 7 or 8 hours Talmud and law, and then all the other bits and pieces. He also was another figure, great figure, giant figure, this fifth Rebbe, because he was in a tremendous, tumultuous turmoil of Judaism. There was the big Zionist movements that began. The Zionist movements began as pure, secular, communistic type of movements.
So we're talking about 1890, 1880?
Yeah, he was the Rebbe. His father passed away in 1882. So that's where we're talking pogroms, and the Jews are fed up already, and they wanted to do something. And this idea of putting everybody in colonies, kibbutzim, and like be communists, everybody's equal, and then get away from the goyim, and all of this stuff, trained to work the land. All of this was happening then as well, and plus the reform movement, which started in Germany in the 1850s, began to infiltrate into Russia, which was a great danger, is a great danger to the Jewish people, if it would be the same way as it was then, when they decided to do away with all kinds of religious everything. I mean, they banned yarmulkes in the synagogues, okay? That's how far they went. And they had services on Sundays instead of Saturdays, just so that they shouldn't be different than anyone else. You're going to church, we're going to synagogue. I mean, they turned everything around, and it was a big danger to Judaism. There was a physical danger, there was a spiritual danger, and this Rebbe kept on going out of town. He also wasn't that well. He wasn't healthy. For whatever reason. He went to see Freud, for example, and they had discussions there in Austria. And he met with a lot of other people. He went incognito sometimes for close to a year, and he would assess there was no internet then, you couldn't know what was going on. He went and found out. He traveled to France, he traveled to Germany, he traveled to a lot of different countries, mostly incognito, usually with his son, just to assess and evaluate the situation of the Jewish people. He was also in touch with all the other great leaders of the Jewish people, and they met at meetings, and they met at gatherings and get-togethers and so on and so forth. He was also during the First World War. There were thousands of Jewish soldiers that were sent to the fronts of Japan and China and so on in the early 1900s, 1915, 16, 17. Who sent them matzah? Who sent them kosher food? This Rebbe went and did it. So this is a Chabad Rebbe, lived in a little shtetl called Lubavitch that till today doesn't have running water, doesn't have a paved road in the entire thing, till today. And he yet was trying to worry about every single Jewish person in the world. That's Chabad. That's what we've been doing all along. In this atmosphere grew up this young boy. Now you usually hear about these great giants of Judaism when they were born, they were already. This one wasn't quite. He was a little on the wild side. Wild means he was wild. He didn't do anything that you would imagine being wild, like drinking and partying. He was a kid, and he was quite wild, and like untamed. He was maybe perhaps even spoiled because he was an only child. Whatever it was, and his father was such a great figure. Whatever it was, he was very brilliant, very smart, did all his studies, but he had another side to him, which turned out to be an unbelievable importance in his life, as we'll soon see. One of the things that he did was his father commanded him to do, perhaps to tame him, was to write. His father told him, I want you to go to all the Hasidim that keep on visiting for all different times, and I want you to hear about the history. I want you to speak to the people who saw the first Rebbe, the second Rebbe, the third Rebbe. And he collected tens of thousands of pages. He would have 2 hours a day that he sat down to write as a kid. And he never stopped writing, even into the 1940s. He kept a journal. He used to have a calendar with big spots per page. And he would write at the end of the day. He would spend a few minutes at least, and very briefly. If something like amazing happened to him that day, he would write it out. Or he would tell a story. He would tell lots of stories in his gatherings. And people would listen and record them, and then they would be published afterwards. He filled with stories because he heard just unbelievable amount of stories. He sorted out the history of Hasidism, the history of Chabad Hasidism. When he writes, you read his things and he transports you back. You can see it, you can smell it. He writes from the 1600s already. He's writing history from that time. There's a book, two-volume book in English called Lubavitcher Rebbe's Memoirs. And he goes through the names. He has every name of the men and the women. It's all completely. He would never write a thing that wasn't. If he doesn't know, if he doesn't this, he says, "I'm not sure of the name." It's so perfectly true. And he just gives you the history, how it happened, what was going on over here. Why did the Baal Shem Tov have to found the Hasidic movement? Now, his father passed away in 1920. His father had to leave Lubavitch because Germany was coming in the First World War.
That was the fifth Rebbe.
The fifth Rebbe left Lubavitch, moved to Rostov, which is on the other side of Russia. And it was not an easy move because Lubavitch was a very established, it's a little shtetl, but it was very established. The Chabad had lots of land over there. They had big buildings big wooden buildings where they studied, and when there was the big yeshiva there, and when guests would come for the high holidays or for the Shavuos, for the holiday, there would be thousands of people all over the place. And that was the center of the whole thing. When the Rebbe left, a lot of life was sapped out of him. But he didn't last very long. He left in 1915 or 16, and he passed away in 1920. A young man. He passed away in 1920. He was born in, I'm just trying to translate the date into Hebrew, Tafresh, Chaf Aleph. So he was born in 1860. And he passed away in 1920. So he was 60 years old. He was a young man. Yeah,
but back then that was.
His father died in his 40s, in his 50s, but his grandfather died in his much later than that.
Different now, yeah.
I'm talking about his grandfather. Okay, so his son took over. He's only 39 years old. And he was supposed to be leading Chabad, and communism was happening. 1920, the revolution was still going on. And this Rebbe, he was the most unbreakable personality of ever. That he refused to give in. He simply refused to give in to the Wildkeit, to the wildness that was going on. See, communism was one thing. Communism, in its original doctorate or whatever it was, doesn't. It says there's no God, basically, but it doesn't say that. But it respects people to be able to worship the God that they wish. But this is why the Jewish people suffer more than anyone else. This is what's called true exile, which happens to this very day. There was a division in the communism called Yevsetskia. Yevsetskia is a shortened version of what or something, which meant basically the Jewish division of communism. The Jewish division of communism was filled with young Jews whose parents were Hasidim, because most of the people in Russia were, whose grandparents were very highly observant Jews, who threw everything off and decided to become communism. And they went out to hurt and to damage Jewish infrastructure. That was their whole focus, to stop teaching children, to close down synagogues, to close down mikvahs, to basically stop the Jewish infrastructure. Because communism overall. By the way, every single last one of them themselves ended up being incarcerated by the time the 1930s were over. God, that whole division was wiped out. Stalin took care of them quickly. Didn't help. And that's what you have today. You have Jews who scream against Israel and Jews who say, there's nothing wrong with criticizing the Israeli government, but to say that falsely accuse Israel of being apartheid and all of that is the most painful part of this. The most painful. When the Israeli government stands up and says, here, terrorists, take this part of land, that's terribly painful. And when Jewish people stand up around the world and say, we condemn Israel and will not buy any, that is, you want to cry, because that is true exile. Yeah, okay, you can criticize Israel, you can do, but that's not, you can't do this. This is the only thing we have. You know, in the words of our friend Helen Thomas, get the hell out of Palestine. Where should they go? Oh, go back home to Germany and to Poland. We don't have a home. We don't have home. Anyway, so this Rebbe had to fight against communism and against Jewish communism, which was much worse because they knew how things work in the Jewish world. The other ones, he could have done things behind the scenes. And this Rebbe, when he started to realize he had ties, he had connections with the communist leaders, you know, you deal with the regime that you're in. But when it came to the Jewish terrorism, it was impossible. And so he set up, he called in 9 people who he knew were a firebrand. And they made a pact, they made an oath that they will go to the last drop of blood, but they will promote Judaism. And that turned over so much. They started sending teachers to teach young children. There was a rule, a law. They had to go to the communist schools, and their schools would go from Tuesday to Monday or something, you know, or Tuesday to Sunday. They would eliminate the Shabbos just so that the Jewish students should have to come to school. And if you didn't come to school, they came knocking on your door, the KGB and all of that stuff. This Rebbe sent out his followers. He kept on preaching one thing: you have a responsibility to the Jewish people, and right now, what is required is simply, you're going to have to fight to the death. And thousands of Chabad Hasidim found themselves down in the basements in the gulags with a bullet between their eyes. You don't even know about it. Now, after communism fell apart, all of the documents of these people, the interrogations, pictures that they took, and what happened to them in the end, are all known. Where, what, how. They kept records. But those days, there were women, there were children. The husband was taken, the father was taken, goodbye. Or sent out to Siberia for 10 years in kangaroo courts and all of that stuff. And within a few days, there would be another Chabad rabbi there taking over. They had to do it a different way or whatever. They kept on trying different ways. And then they arrested the Rebbe himself. After a while, they felt that they couldn't do it because he was such a giant of a figure. This is the 6th Rebbe. The communists.
The communists.
Yeah.
Jewish communists?
They kept on harassing him.
Yeah.
The Jewish communists were the ones who came to arrest him. I'm not sure if it was Jewish.
Right.
They kept on harassing him. They forced him to move to Leningrad, St. Petersburg, Leningrad. And in 1927, he went to Moscow, this Rebbe. And he stood up on the bima. There were thousands of people living there, and everybody came to hear what the Rebbe had to say. And for 2 hours, he delivered a discourse. It was a month before Purim. So the discourse was about Purim and about Mordechai, even in the dire times of Haman, stood and gathered together the children and taught them Torah and had them, and that's what brought down the downfall. Anyway, that speech was going to cost him. And he writes in his journal, I know it's going to cost me. I was warned not to say, I was warned this, and I don't care. I have to say this is important. This guy he's a holy Jew, but his wildness made him the one that was non-breakable. He was a brilliant scholar in Torah and in philosophy, and he had a father like that, so he was very close to his father. Everything was his father. Everything he writes is about his father. And But he also had to stand up to preserve Judaism. There were, I think, 11 million Jews living in Russia in those days. The Nazis took care of some of them, communists took care, but whoever kept Judaism going, all the other leaders and everything either left Russia or went in private there. They couldn't handle it. How can you? It's almost impossible to imagine. He wouldn't rest. So in 1927, in the month of June, they came to him at about 1 o'clock in the morning. He writes, there's a whole book. I have the book in English. As soon as we get the library up, which will be the next week or two, we'll have that book will be out. It's called The Rebbe, The Prince in Prison. He writes a whole book about every detail of his incarceration from the moment they came until the moment he was released. What happened, what they said to him, how he responded, and so on. Anyway, they arrested him and they sentenced him to death. Now, his followers, who were then in Latvia and in the United States and other places, went berserk. And the communist government needed other countries. This was a big change. It took a few years for them to set themselves up, and now they were trying to do commerce, especially with Latvia. Latvia was a big deal for them because it's on the sea, and they had connections, very good connections with other places. They needed Latvia. In the Latvia parliament was a Chabad Chassid, and he kept going back and forth to Russia.
Is this before the? Sorry to interrupt you.
1927.
The revolution that occurred.
Yeah, 1927. So later.
Yeah.
Anyway, they put a lot of pressure onto Russia, so they commuted his sentence, his death sentence, which you had the documents. It says shooting between the eyes. They commuted his sentence to 10 years in Kostroma. Kostroma is far, far out. Now, get rid of this guy, stuff him in the far-reaching corners of who knows what. And he was there for 10 days, and then they caved into the pressure, and they released him unconditionally. He is the one man that stood up to communism and succeeded. And then they said to him, we are going to monitor every single, whatever it was. He realized that by staying there, he would do no good for him or for his people. But by leaving, he wouldn't forsake these people. So what he did was, he left Russia, and they were so happy to get rid of him. They couldn't. They closed the door behind him. In the end of 1927, right after Simchas Torah, he left. And he sat on the train and wrote a letter. You cry when you read that letter. He said, I'm writing this from the blood of my heart. And he writes to them how he's not leaving them. He is not going to abandon them. He's leaving so he can help them better. He explains how. This is like so defiant, He sends this letter out. And then he does not stop. In 1929, this is only a year and a half later. I'm sorry?
He must have come here.
He came to the United States for a year and a half. Unfortunately, he came when the crash happened. Right then and there, he couldn't raise money. He was so frustrated. He writes a journal every day of where he went. In Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and to Chicago, and to St. Louis, and to Philadelphia, and to around New York, and in New Jersey. He went up and down. This is a man who the communists beat him so badly. My wife was saying before, he asked to put on the tefillin that he was holding in his hand, and they said no. And so at one point they said, follow me. So as he's following, he takes out his tefillin and he wraps them on his arm, and then he wraps them on his head. And then the guard turned around and said, what did you just do? He turned to him, and there's a metal staircase which has about 25 stairs. I have a picture of this. And they kicked him down. They gave him a kick, and he went tumbling down the stairs. But instead of covering himself, he put his hand on the tefillin. And he got really, really beaten up by that. And eventually he developed MS. He had a couple of strokes. He was a strong. You could see the pictures of him when in his 20s. He's strong, physical, big man. And then when he comes off the boat in 1929, he's already not that physical. When he comes to America the second time, 1940, he's in a wheelchair already. Because he had a stroke. Then 1945 he had another stroke. In 1950 he passed away. So he came to America and went to Israel. The only Chabad Rebbe that was in Israel went to visit Israel for a couple of weeks. In 1929, summer of 29. Then he came to the United States. He stayed here till 1930. the end of 1930. He was here for about a year and a half. And there was nothing going on. New York was not what it is today. There was hardly any Jews there. Certainly not observant Jews. People came to America and threw their tefillin in the Hudson River on the way in, and so this was a very different type of time. And he had to simply talk about Aleph Bes, and he had to talk about Judaism or whatever. Here's a typical story. Three young teenagers, troublemakers, Jewish troublemakers, heard about this Rebbe, and they said that they're going to go in and they're going to talk to him. They're going to like have a good time with this guy. They're going to make fun of this rabbi. They knocked on the door where the rabbi was staying in Brooklyn, and somebody came to the door and said, "What do you want?" So we need to speak to the Rebbe. They said, "Sorry, yeah." They said, "No, it's very, very important. Somebody is ill. Somebody is not well." Whatever they said over there. In the meantime, the Rebbe came out and said, "What's going on over here?" And these kids said that they need to talk to you. I said, "Well, bring him in." And he had this countenance. He had this face that was, of a holy man. And these kids were just mesmerized. And he smiled at them and he said, "What's your name? And what's this?" Anyway, all three of them eventually didn't become, observant Jews, but they became Yidden. They had a connection to Judaism by the time he finished. He took care of each one of them, asked them about their lives and what's their hobby, what's their favorite thing, gave them some money. He did things to them that was complete opposite of anything they ever heard of a rabbi coming from Russia. This was his goal, to reach out, to build, to make Judaism. He had to fight against communism in Russia. He eventually went back to Riga, to Latvia, stayed there till 1933, then moved to Poland, to Warsaw for 2 years, and then went to a little outside of a little suburb of Warsaw called Otwock, which is, I've been there, I've passed there. Otwock is a little resort type of place with lots of trees and flowers and plants, and he needed that for the developing troubles that he was going through. And so he moved his headquarters to that little shtetl. And there are people still around today who studied there. Very old people, but they're still around. One or two of them are still around today. My brother's wife's grandfather was one of them who was there in Otwock. 1939. For Rosh Hashanah, he went to Warsaw, and that was when the Nazis went, the Blitzkrieg. He writes about that as well. I mean, just unbelievable how he describes. Anyway, he had somebody in Germany who was a major Nazi officer who was a very good acquaintance of his. And this guy, they spent 3 months looking for him, the Nazis, to get him out. They whisked him out of Warsaw. Eventually, he was told, this is a whole story. Anyway, he got out of Warsaw. They took him to Latvia, to Lithuania. From Lithuania, they took him to Germany, through Germany, and into Sweden, where from there he took a boat. In 1940, he came to the United States and set the Chabad agenda in the United States. And now he had to fight against the Americans. He never had to stop fighting. Had to fight against the apathy, the backwardness. To see a yeshiva student with a beard, to see a teenager with a beard those days was like, that's freaky. That was bizarre. Nobody had beards. Today, to see someone without a beard is like, what? In Brooklyn for sure. No, but all the baseball players all have beards, and beards are sort of in again for whatever reason. But I'm not complaining. So this Rebbe had to, and from his wheelchair, he came off the boat, a physically broken man, knowing that the cities in Eastern Europe, including the Russia, and including which his heart was still there, and including were completely burning, were burning and were going to burn. And he saw every bit of this. He knew it, and he tried his hardest. But the different people that he tried to get out, and it didn't succeed. He got his son-in-law and his daughter out of France. They were in France. But he had another daughter, his youngest daughter and son-in-law, both were murdered in Treblinka. They were there. I've been there. I've been to Treblinka. Think about them every time I go. On Rosh Hashanah.
They came to his office to give him citizenship.
That was in 1949. That the law in America was if you want to become an American citizen, you have to go to the court, whatever it was. They changed the law. And that it can be done in a private home if the judges go to the home. They got a few judges, and they came to 770 Eastern Parkway, and he became an American citizen. He wore his Shabbos clothing on that day. Becoming an American citizen for him was that big of a deal. When he came to America, when he came off the boat, he also wore his Shabbos clothing into America. For him, it was, I am starting a new goal and role in life. I have a new agenda. He comes off the boat in a wheelchair. Before they take him upstairs to his room in the Greystone Hotel in Manhattan, he asks to meet with some of the people who had come to see him. There was like this reception for him. And he goes into a room with them, and he says to them, we are starting a yeshiva, the Chabad yeshiva. And they said, like, okay, that's a good goal. Let's talk about it. He said, no, I mean tomorrow morning. And they said, Rebbe, America is anders, which means America is different. And he said, I have come to America to make sure that America is nicht anders. America will not be any different. My goal is that this country should be just as accessible to Judaism and with kosher food and with printing presses. Today I can't even imagine that it shouldn't be that way. But then in 1940 there was nothing here. There was no real infrastructure. There was just a few synagogues with some old rabbis from who knows where. And he started this movement that the rest, as they say, is history. When his son-in-law came in 1941, he appointed him over that all those departments. The publishing department of Chabad, which is that little emblem that you see here. That emblem you'll find on tens of thousands of books now. And that's Kihat, that's the Chabad emblem that the Rebbe had commissioned. Also the wing of sending out people throughout the world was completely run by the Rebbe. And also the social networks of helping people financially and emotionally and so on also was by the Rebbe. And that's a brief biography of this man, which is actually, there's some of it printed in here. There's a brief biography printed in this book, which is not copied, which is 13 pages long, just briefly about this Rebbe. And so most of these, I just gave even a briefer biography. So this Rebbe was a very prolific writer, especially in the 1930s, when he left Russia, where he wasn't constantly bombarded by the daily meetings with people, because he was out of Russia. His goal was now to supply them. Talk about matzah. Every single year he sent in matzah. One year they said, no matzah. You know what he did? He sent in flour, kosher for Passover flour. And he had people throughout Russia, by the way, throughout the entire Russia. Every last one of them eventually was arrested and thrown into jail. Some of them didn't make it. Some of them sat there. I knew Hasidim who sat in Siberia. I saw them. I interacted with them. They knew me, who sat in Russia for 7, 8, 9 years. I knew a guy who lived in Jerusalem. And when I studied in Jerusalem, I went to see him every few weeks. We had the Fabrengen, a little talk with him. He would tell us stories. He was there for 20 years in the Soviet gulag out in Siberia. I knew a chassid who, when I saw him in the mikveh, he had to wear special boots that were made for him, custom made, because his feet were frostbitten. Because he lost his shoe one day in the mud or in the snow, and they didn't replace it, and all his toes were mangled. I saw them with my own eyes, and I asked my father, I said, "What's going on with this?" He said, he was sent in jail. Or he sat in Siberia, sent away to very freezing places, and there wasn't protection, and there wasn't this. So I knew these people. I don't know if anyone is alive today who was in jail in the 30s. They had to have been, in their 20s by the time the 1930s. It would be 90.
Maybe 100.
There might be one or two living still in Israel, very old, on the way out type of people. But when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, these guys were in the 50s and 60s. I mean, they were very active and very. What I mean is, there's no active. You don't hear from these people anymore.
We knew what you meant.
Right.
They're not as popular.
They're old.
Right. Anyway, so the Rebbe's own father, whose name was Schneerson, of course, the Rebbe's own father was living in a place called Dnepropetrovsk before communists took over, and then they called it Yekaterinoslav. But then they went back to Dnepropetrovsk. Just because they thought that Yekaterinoslav was a little bit too difficult, so they went to Dnepropetrovsk. Means the Dnieper is the river Dnieper. There's a major river in Russia called the Dnieper River, and this is a very nice big town, an industrial town. And he was the chief rabbi of there, southern Ukraine, whatever it was. Anyway, 1939 they came for him. They sent him out to a place called Chiali, which is somewhere in Uzbekistan. I mean, just out there. He said his wife wrote her memoirs. There was no paper to be found in that town. No pen or paper. And this man was the Rebbe's father was such a holy man, and he was such a prolific a Kabbalist, and he just needed to get things out. And so his wife went to the mountains and found herbs. She was taught by the locals, found herbs and made ink.
Yeah.
And you see the different colors ink. Sometimes it's green, sometimes it's red, sometimes it's blue, sometimes black. She boiled it on the stove and made ink, and he used a feather. There were plenty of birds around, or they found a fountain pen or something, and he wrote in the margins of his books. Those days, the margins were much bigger, wider. And he wrote very, very concise, very precise. I have 5 thick volumes that were taken from that. Okay? That he wrote on the Zohar and on the Hasidic, or whatever book he had. He only had 4 or 5 books with him. Every one of those books are completely covered with his notes going around the page and little circles on the inside. And so this man was taken to that place, and it was so primitive there. That his wife writes in her journal. Later on, she wrote her memoirs, which are also available even in English today. She writes there that these were people who were more like animals. Complete people who were so completely removed from anything. They lived, in huts that were made from dung. I mean, that kind of thing. They didn't have wood. They didn't have things that were growing, and they would live in the mud, and they were dirty all the time. They hardly washed themselves. That type of thing. She said these were people, but more like animals. They were living there for survival. That's the type of place that they sent this great holy man to. He couldn't handle it. 1944, he came out, and he developed very quickly. He developed a cancer, and by the summer of 1944, he moved to Almaty, which is the capital of Uzbekistan, or what are these stands over there? And that's where he passed away, 1944. So he basically died very also in his 60s from all of this trouble. He was also a strong man, but they sent him the Rebbe received a picture of his father in 1960 from after he came out of this ordeal. And the Rebbe writes on the bottom of this, "Are you sure this is my father?"
Wow.
He did not. I can show you the 2 pictures. The one that was found from the communist files in 1939 versus what he looked like in 1944. In 5 years, the man's appearance changed so much that his own son couldn't recognize the man. He said he's sure. There's almost no resemblance between the 2 pictures. I have a book that was printed in 1990 with his picture, based on his Torah. In 1991, they found his communist picture, and if you put them together, they're just unrecognizable. I'll show you. I have time. I'll go get it.
This was always
that was their point.
They broke them down. So when do you want help for next Sunday? As long as we got a little break here,
Well, it starts at 3.
right?
Um,
So like right after class?
yeah, instead of you.
Do you need anything that we can pick up outside of food and,
I got some plates already. I didn't get some tablecloth yet. Maybe some red plastic.
what kind of?
Bread, plastic.
On this
Yeah,
page,
yeah, yeah.
this page that I've opened has his writings in the margins.
Oh, wow, look at that.
Oh, yikes.
That's the only paper he had. And then here is the picture of 1944, and when you turn back the page, 1939.
Gosh.
You just
See?
in 5 years they ruined the man. They destroyed him. You think, okay, they sent him away, so he lived his life. His wife can't even with him. He didn't have a life.
Yeah.
Pass it that way?
That torture will do that to you.
Yeah.
They didn't work. He didn't go out to work. He didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Or just sitting around.
That was the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Inactive and squashed. He couldn't leave that little shtetl, that village.
You can read that? It's hard to read.
This, first of all, it's
Small.
even hard to read this.
It is, yes, it's so small.
Yeah, right.
This
Boy,
is the
he
Zohar.
Really,
But he had to. He had to conserve.
yes.
That's
Boy.
phenomenal.
And so what he did was he wrote very, very concise. They published it in the books in 1970, 71. And then from 1971 and on, every time the Rebbe spoke on a Shabbos, he would take a little piece of his father's work and he would say, first of all, I don't understand what he's saying over here. Second of all, he never was able to finish his thoughts because he had to write very concise. And then the Rebbe would answer the questions and discuss it. And this book is those discussions on his father's works, which is written on the Zohar, the Tanya, whatever. Torah Menachem, this is the Torah of the Rebbe,
Yes.
but this is the beauty of Levi Yitzchak, which
Yeah.
is his father's name. So this was this was one of the examples of what they did in the late 30s to completely squash Judaism. And I'll just conclude here, and I know I've taken up most of the time of the class, but I'll conclude here by saying that the Rebbe in 1950, who took over the mantle of leadership of Chabad, never, ever stopped to take care of the Jews in Russia. He would send in people. I know people from every single decade, including my own father, who went in 1981 for Rosh Hashanah. Left the family, went to Russia for 10 days as a tourist, and went there to.
Books and.
He went with books. They asked him, "What do you need all these books for?" I'm a Torah scholar. Inside of the thickest, see, Chabad has books from the fifth Rebbe, the prolific Rebbe, 500-600 pages.
They let him in. Huh?
The books were okay, but the books were left there.
They didn't know
None of
what
the books were taken out. But inside of the margins, inside of the pages were mezuzahs, portions for tefillin. These were the kind of things that they would prepare for a month.
That was the time when I was living in Muncie, and we were on the Jewish bus at the time. One of the people who we commuted with, he was a lawyer back in New York, but he too went back and forth with, and he'd bring in, anyone have anything to get over there? It was really
Yeah, that was
fascinating.
going on back then.
Yeah,
So
The
my
refuseness.
father who lives in London, so London was closer to Russia than the United States. He would start sending this time of the year matzah into Russia. Matzah can last for a year, and every time somebody went, just a pound or two. By the time Passover was there, you had lots and lots of matzah there because people kept on going, just a bag, a box of this, and they kept on sending this stuff in. into Russia. The Rebbe never stopped talking about them. The one thing he was very, very severely against, militantly against, was these big demonstrations in New York. Let my people go free, whatever. He said that every single one of those demonstrations went back to harm the Jews in Russia. See, nobody knew what was going on in Russia except for the Rebbe. He was in constant connection with them.
People send videos to him. They spoke to the video and they sent it to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe watched it.
Films, tapes. Most people who went in there had to be people with photographic memory, so they can remember names, and so they can come back and what do you call it? Unwind.
Your grandfather also went, no?
My grandfather went in 1991. That was when that stuff was all over already. The Rebbe said it's going to be gone in 1987. I was there, standing at one of the Rebbe's public farbrengens, Passover time. He said, very soon, communism is going to end and millions of Jews are going to leave Russia. 1987. And I want to start preparing now. He asked for a city, a big neighborhood in Jerusalem, to be built with academic and scientific apparatus, so that people who are academics and doctors and scientists and whatever should have immediately places to go. And then he went and spoke to some of the activists over there. One of the activists, a man by the name of Dr. Bronover, may he live and be well. He's not well. He has Alzheimer's. Anyway, but he went and met Gorbachev later. He himself a refusnik, came out in the 70s, very, very active in the Russian Jewry, outside of Russia, printed books and scientific journals and so on. And he met with the Rebbe personally, privately, over the next few months to plan to strategize how this should work and where the funding should come from, all of that. In 1990, Gorbachev came to visit Israel, and he went to meet him. And Gorbachev said, tell me a little bit about Chabad. What is this? And he spoke to him about that. And he said that in 1987, the Rebbe said this is soon going to end. This was 2 or 3 years before the end of communism. And Gorbachev says, I can't believe this. You can actually see this in a video from Bronover, says this. He says, in 1987, there was a decision made that we are going to tighten the screws of communism more than going back to the 1930s style, because it wasn't working. It was falling apart. So we wanted to go, in the 1930s it was working for some reason. So we were going back, and that was going to, in other words, there was no end to communism going on. How was he ever able to see this? Anyway, so
everything was, I went there when, 1990 or 89?
Yeah, that was different.
And
89 was different. 89 was everything was much.
But all the infrastructure, you could see there was the infrastructure. If a roof caved in or a side, it just left. They just left it. They had no money to fix anything.
Those big gray buildings, they don't have money now either.
Yeah.
The economy is in a mess. That's why they're making a noise about distractions, about all kinds of other things now. That's one of the methods of thugs is to go fight with other people. Saddam was saying that people just go into other countries and invade them, and that causes a distraction, it causes disruption, it causes chaos and war, and people stop talking about economy, people talk about the war, people start they got to get money for the war, to rebuild and whatever. Anyway, so the Rebbe fought this communism in his way. He didn't have to stand up to them, but there were people going. Anyone who ever went into Russia was Jewish. Somehow the Rebbe knew about them. He discovered, and they would be called. They would be asked to meet with the Rebbe or meet with the people, or whatever. And they would. And they would go in and do kinds of things. Then they had to send in rabbis. I have to understand. People wanted to get married there. There was no rabbis who could officiate. People wanted to get divorced. Needed a get. People needed to ask, with questions in Judaism. You know what kind of questions these people would ask? People would ask questions like, if I don't keep Shabbos, can I daven and say Shabbos? If I don't do, and like these were questions that you can't believe. They weren't worried about, they never asked, can we please leave? The Rebbe also didn't allow the leaders to leave. There were certain leaders over there with long beards and who had learned and studied in the old day. They couldn't leave. The Rebbe said, if you leave, then everything collapses. Later on, these people came to visit and then came to the Rebbe. The Rebbe made a big deal out of each and every one of them. These people who for 40, 50 years stood and did the work. Anyway, this is the Rebbe who authored this letter. He was a tremendous scholar who found time to study, to teach, to communicate, to write. His son-in-law, this Rebbe, as soon as he got married in 1928 to the second daughter, his father-in-law pushed on him a lot of these correspondence writings because it took a lot of time for research and to page numbers and all of that. And the Rebbe was then in Germany. He sent his son-in-law to Germany and then to France to study in college. The Rebbe was a mathematical engineer. He took engineering and he took math and some other things. Took one course a day. In the meantime, though, he was busy writing books, basically, editing. Anything that came out of Chabad was his job, and anything, then they would communicate. All monies went through France or to Germany, not through Latvia, one of these countries that weren't quite 100%. All the money of Chabad was overseen by the Rebbe because he was in a stable country with stable economy, with good banks and stuff like that. So the Rebbe, the fourth Rebbe went and did this. We're going to just begin now. We're not really going to get into it, but next week we'll get into it. Page 20. Wait a minute. There's an introduction. No. There's an introduction. All right. Page 13. We'll start at the beginning. Introduction and summary. Again, this concept over here is all esoteric and mystical. So, in order to understand it, I don't know if you managed to get through the Good Shabbos email this past week. But there was a lot of. I'm sorry. The transmission. But there was a lot of deep stuff in there, which we've studied, we've covered before. But these are difficult ideas, and so therefore, more introduction we have, the better it is. It arose within the will of the Infinite One. This is a quote from Sha'ar HaHakdamot, if you see in the italics at the end of this paragraph. Durush Abiyah, beginning, and Eitz Chaim 143. This Sha'ar HaHakdamot is written by a man by the name of Rabbi Chaim Vital. Rabbi Chaim Vital was a student of one of the greatest mystical, holy Kabbalists we've ever had, a man by the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, known to us as the Ari, or the Arizal. The Ari came from Spain to Egypt, and then had one of these revelations by one of these angels or something, and then he told him to go to Tzfat. In Tzfat, there was a bunch of Kabbalists there. He was very young, in his 30s, and he immediately became their leader as he started teaching them stuff, and they were overwhelmed by what he had known. He only lived for another 2 or 3 years, and then he passed away. When he passed away, he asked his main student, who was Rabbi Chaim Vital, to bury all of the works that he had written. He didn't write anything himself. The student wrote everything his Rebbe taught, and want more buried with me. And a few months later, he came in a dream and said, okay, now you can take them out. So he opened them up and took out the books, and that's what we have today from the Arizal. Those are just, that's pure Kabbalah and all kinds of stuff in there.
Why would he have done that?
Because he was worried about it getting out. Kabbalah was very quiet, very secret. There were secret societies. It wasn't as open until he himself, the Ari, said that it's a mitzvah to start revealing this. But that's Hasidic movement came to open it up, and it wasn't as open as it would be today, of course. The Ari, when he lived in Tzfat, he found on a mountain, which was a mountain that had some graves in it as well, great holy prophets and other great luminaries in Judaism. And there was a little spring running through this, and he created a mikveh out of this fresh spring. This mikveh is running to today. It is freezing whenever you go. I was just there. When I was there on the birthright in February, I spoke to these kids about it, and then the girls went to a mikveh, women's mikveh. What? Sorry?
Indoors.
A women's mikveh indoors, yeah. This mikveh is also indoors, but it's in a cave. It's inside of a cave. So you go into a cave and then you go into this tub. And it's freezing. It's so unbelievably freezing. And I told these kids, I said, you've never been to a mikveh, you may never go to a mikveh again. This is not a typical mikveh. This is a holy mikveh. There is a tradition that whoever goes to this mikveh will not die without repenting, without returning to God. And I give you this opportunity to follow me into this mikveh. Out of the 16 boys that I had, 11 or 12 came. You got to take off all your clothes and go in, the way you came out, that's the way you go into that mikveh. 11. And then across the mountain is where he's buried, the Arizal, and Rab Chaim Vital and his group. And next year when we go to Israel, that will be one of our stops. The women will go to that mikveh. You'll have an opportunity to dip in that
Prepare
mikveh.
yourself, collect the ice in the refrigerator and practice in the bathtub.
Now when it's June and it's 98 degrees out there, the sun is burning, whatever it is, 90 degrees. You go into that mikveh, it's freezing. It's still freezing, but when you come out, you don't feel that bad. When it's February and it was about 35 degrees, wind was howling out there in Tzfat. There's a mountain. And we went into this water. It's
We have a towel that says I've been to the printed on it.
Yeah.
You buy it right after you
It's like a medal of valor, huh?
I'm not sure if we're going to have a towel. Whatever. I'm going to try and organize a tour of a real, proper, modern day, normal mikveh, then go to the Ariz mikveh, so we'll have a lot better understanding of a mikveh. The men. The women will go to the women's issues. That's we haven't organized anything. We just came up with the date. That's the goal is to have that as part of it.
May
May
26th
20
through
Tuesday, May 26th to Wednesday,
yes,
June
June 10th, I think.
or 11th. Yeah, something like that. It's 16 days.
Yeah.
So after school finishes here. It's Memorial Day is May
And you
25th.
can break it up if you don't want to go to Poland. They're trying to work it out so you don't have to do the Poland end, and we'll all meet in Israel. So
But Poland will be
How
also.
long is the Poland part?
The Poland part will be about 6 days.
yeah,
I wanted it to be a little longer than just simply in and out. If 4 days won't be enough, 5 days.
Do we get the book with it?
Yeah, of course. 50th birthday's coming. Everyone goes on that trip, gets that book, if I can get it published. Wait a minute.
first we gotta get it finished.
The book will be finished by my 50th birthday. The question is, will it be accepted? That's not up to me. It could be privately published, personally published. I can do that. My brother is a book person. He may do it for me anyway. But first we're going to the big people.
Is it in English?
Yeah.
No,
And there's a
really?
glossary of terms in there as well.
Uh-huh.
All right. So the Ari was one of the holiest that we ever had. He's still in Tzfat today. You can learn all about him. You can go to his synagogue. He had 2 synagogues. He had an Ashkenazi synagogue and a Sephardi synagogue. We would visit both of them on our trip in Tzfat. It will be part of our day. There will be a whole day in Tzfat. Part of our day there will be learning about him and visiting his places, his synagogues, where he studied, where he taught, his mikveh, and his grave. Anyway, so the Ari, his student, Rabbi Chaim, writes the following. It arose within the will of the Infinite One, blessed is his name, to emanate, create, form, and actualize his worlds. So let's stop right here for a second. It arose within his will. He decided, it was his will of the Creator, to emanate, create, form, and actualize his worlds, known as the worlds of Atzilut, which means emanate in English, Beriah, which means to create, Yetzira, to form, and Asiya, to do action. This is written in Sha'ar HaHakdamot, All of the Ari's talks are in Shar this, Shar that. He's the one who, by the way, talks most about incarnation. In fact, many of the graves in Israel today are known because he went there and he said, here is buried Rabbi so-and-so. This is prophet, this and that and the other. He was in touch with souls. And he has a whole book just on the souls, which I actually have in English as well. But you might not get through the first page. It's very mystical, esoteric. It's stuff that you read, and you can read it in English, but to understand that is difficult. So he writes that God decided, it chose, he had in his will. What's the time now?
7 after 11.
Oh gosh, I don't even know. So he decided, God decided in his will to do these 4 actions of emanate, and calls them worlds: the world of emanation, world of creation, world of formation, and then the world of action. We are on the end bottom rung of the world of action. This is called the physical world of action. That's where we are. We are on the absolute, we're the lowest that can possibly go from God, away from God, if you will. There's nothing lower spiritually than our universe, our world, because it's physical. Everything above it is all spiritual. And I use the term above, not in space, but sort of higher, greater, higher up.
Is this Atzilut?
Atzilut is the
Is
top.
that the top?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the top one. World of emanation.
Yeah.
The word Atzilut also means close, like Eitzel, next to, in Hebrew.
Is it
So-
the white one, the white circle?
This is not the worlds. This is within the worlds how the flow of energy works. This is the 10 it's in a Good
Yeah.
Shabbos email. That how the energy, the flow goes. But within each world you got these 10. But what are these worlds? The worlds seem very, fluffy. You can talk about as many worlds as you want. What's a world? What is a world? From where to where does it have a beginning and an end? And why do you need 4 worlds? And why? What is all of this? And this is what this introduction and summary is going to cover before we even get to the actual thing. It's just a short introduction, 5 pages.
Now, how did they come to this? Is this like just the oral?
So
Tradition,
it's
or-
Kabbalah. Kabbalah was given to Moses at Sinai, oral tradition, just
Yeah.
like everything else was. However, you find all of these, everything that is written, all of it is an origin in the actual Torah. For example, this is an easy one.
Oh.
This is an easy one to explain because the name of God, which is the created, it has 4 letters.
Yeah.
Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey.
Yeah.
Why 4 letters? Why did he have to make a name with 4 letters? What's a name with 4 letters? God, what does he need a name for? Why does God need a name? Name for what? Name is for you to call him. He doesn't need the name himself. So in other words, his name is there to show about a projection from God out. So if that's the case, things are coming from God out, then the fact that it has 4 letters means that there are 4 standards, 4 levels. We call them worlds, a borrowed term, because they are an entire level within themselves. Anyway, here's one example. There are other places in the Torah all of this is alluded to. For example, the seven characteristics that again, in the Good Shabbos email, we've studied about this before. Where do you get 7 from? These are in the verses as well. The great one, the strong one, and the beautiful one, and the enduring one, and it talks about God and all of these 7 levels. Everything is based, eventually, you can all find it back in the Torah. Some of it is hidden within words, or even letters, or by missing the words or letters. Like everything else, is all you can find it all. These are all expansions of this. That's taking these ideas that are very secretly sort of hidden in the Torah. You'll never know. They could even be in acronyms. For example, there are 12 months in the year. Each one of the months has a different combination of 4 letters of God's name. Scattered, and this will probably go straight over your heads, but scattered throughout the written Torah in the 3 sections, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, are 12 times where you have 4 letters And each one of those letters are Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, but in different orders. It's an acronym. I'm sorry, you have 4 words, and they begin with a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey in different words.
Yeah.
In fact, in this week's Torah portion, dealing with something that you'll never, it's about exchanges. If you take something that belongs to the temple, and you say, I'm going to exchange it with this animal, then not only is the animal that you've given as the exchange, not only is that sanctified, but in fact, you can't take away from the temple, so everything now belongs to him. The exchange and the original. The words in the Torah, V'haya hu usmarasa yiyeh kodesh. It and its exchange will be sanctified. V'haya hu. V'haya,
That's what I said.
I'm missing a word before. Yihiyeh v'haya hu usmarasa. Something like that. Yihiyeh kodesh. So you have a yud and a hey and a vav and a hey in the law that talks about nothing. That's the combination of one of them. In the Megillah, the book of Esther, there's 3 of them. Where you have, like when Esther says, I want you and Haman to come to a party tonight. Yavo hamelach v'haman hayom yud hey vav hey. That's the straight one. There's other ones that are vav hey yud hey. This one is yud hey. May the king and Haman come today. It's innocent words, but they're the 4 letters that begin those words. 12 times around the entire written Torah is God's name written in acronym form. And each one of them corresponds to a different month. Now, which one corresponds to which month? The one that's in this week's portion corresponds to the month of Shvat, which is January, February. Why? What? I can't get into this, but there's no end to this mysticism. There are 13 months this year because there's an extra added leap year.
Okay.
It's a very good question, by the way. That's actually brought up in the writings. Like, what happens in the 13th month? That's why there's 12 months. There could be 16 months if you made each month each thing has mystical meanings and ideas to them, and it's all found in the Torah. Except if you and me reading it, we might never enter our minds to even look at these things, to pay attention to this stuff. But it's all there. It's all in the Torah. Sometimes in hidden acronym form, sometimes this form, sometimes that form, amounts, gematrias, everything counts up to something. There's no extra letter in the Torah. It's all there for something. And it could be in the most difficult or complicated, arcane parts of the Torah. You'll find stuff in there, names of countries, people. You say, this is the boring part. In there's all kinds of stuff, hidden secrets. It's all stuff in
Now
there.
a computer, they took the whole Torah and put it in computerized form and started counting every 7 letters.
That's different. That's Bible codes. I'm not even talking about that.
Yeah.
I'm not even talking about that. But I'm just talking about simply following the Kabbalists. They don't make statements. No one makes a statement. If it's a statement, then somebody said, where do you get that from? The same way you asked that question, the greater scholars ask even more. Who told you that? Where are you getting this from? Nothing can come just because I said so, because I woke up one morning. It all has its own base in somewhere. But you trust the big ones, the greatest ones. You trust them because they have proven themselves over and over again. Anyway, this is not a hard thing to find because all things are 4 with God's name. So you have the 4 comes to play a lot in spirituality and godliness. All right. That'll do for today.
Can I just ask you a question on Zionism? You said it was